Hey, so welcome to another episode of the Flow Tribe podcast. So in this episode, I'm speaking with Derik Singh. So Derik he's an alchemist, he's an herbalist, he's also an entrepreneur. He's the founder of a company called Alcami Elements. And in today's episode, we dive into something that I knew very little bit about actually before I met Derik a few years ago, which is the world of medicinal mushrooms. So I guess like most people, when it came to mushrooms, I knew about two types of mushrooms. I knew about the mushrooms that I would eat, like in a stir fry or a salad. And I knew about psychedelic mushrooms. But there's this whole other world of mushrooms, which are medicinal mushrooms. So mushrooms like reishi and mushrooms like lion's mane or cordyceps or chaga. These are mushrooms that are becoming more and more popular. We're seeing more and more products containing these mushrooms, and more research is going into these types of mushrooms. So I wanted to have Derik on on this podcast in order to talk about that, to maybe shed some light on the world of medicinal mushrooms. So it was an awesome episode. I learned a lot. I think you will too. And so without further ado, here's my conversation with Derik Singh. So Derik, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the time. So let's start off with an introduction. I'd love for you to introduce yourself and kind of let people know who you are and what you do.
Well, first, thanks for having me, Patrick. And people call me by different names. Some people call me a wizard. Some people call me an alchemist. I just like to consider myself a humble investigator of sorts in the natural world. And I have a really big passion and heart for all things natural, all things nature. And I do consider myself an herbalist, and I like to play with herbs. I do consider myself a food alchemist. I'll call myself that, and an entrepreneur, where I like to channel my creativity and passion for these things in business. And so I have my own business, and I like to collaborate with different businesses and people, making different drinks and concoctions. And I also do consulting on the side. Of course, with health and herbalism and helping people get set in the right direction.
Okay, so you wear a lot of hats, is what you're
Yeah.
saying. Yeah. So I've known you for a few years now. And when I first met you, I believe we were at a movement practice where a whole bunch of us had come together. And that was, honestly, I still talk about that one day because I felt it was such a unique experience that we all kind of shared this passion for movement, but we all came at it from different angles. However, today I think we're going to dive into a different part of what you do, which is this herbalism, focusing, from what I remember, very specifically on mushrooms. And you honestly shared with me things about mushrooms that I had no idea. You know, I knew that the mushrooms that I know are the mushrooms that you eat in a stir fry. And then there's the mushrooms that make you a little bit funny, right?
Exactly.
So, I think for most people, that's what, if you say, hey, let's talk mushrooms, those are those two categories. But I think there's this whole other world of medicinal mushrooms that people really don't know that much about. So that's what I would love for you to share. I would love for you to share some of the knowledge that you have about these types of mushrooms. And maybe let's dive into maybe your top three or top four medicinal mushrooms and why you're so excited about them. So maybe if you could give us kind of an overlook, a little bit of an overview about the medicinal mushroom world, and then we can maybe dive into some more specific information.
Well, mushrooms are very interesting. And I think when people are just getting started in the world of herbalism or wanting to know where to start, I think mushrooms is a great place to start. One, because medicinal mushrooms are gaining worldwide recognition. And there's a lot of science that's, being done on them, improving their benefits and their properties and what they can do for our overall health. And like you said, there's mushrooms that can sustain you, and there's some mushrooms that could make you a little funny. I came across a quote that said that, mushrooms could sustain you, mushrooms could kill you, but also mushrooms can enlighten you. And I like to, bring that into like three separate categories. So you've got the edible kind of mushrooms like portobello and things that you can find in your salad or sautés. And a lot of those mushrooms are the ground mushrooms, the mushrooms that grow on the forest floor. And a lot of people need to be careful with those. A lot of them are edible and really healthy for you, but a lot of them are highly poisonous and medicinal, and a different kind of medicinal, more like a poisonous medicinal, where it could really, damage your liver or actually kill you. And then you've got medicinal mushrooms, which are mushrooms that typically grow off of trees, off of wood, on living trees, on dead trees. And then you've got the psychedelic mushrooms, which grow on other things. But I've become really a big fan of these medicinal mushrooms way back when I was 17 years old, when one of the most revered and legendary mushrooms, which goes way back into antiquity, into ancient China, called reishi mushroom, was grown in my parents' backyard. And that's when I first grew a fascination for these things. I was already being introduced to herbalism and Chinese medicine, but then when reishi started to grow in my parents' yard, I was totally blown away. And so I just dove in really deep. And reishi was the gateway in helping me discover the kingdom of medicinal mushrooms. And medicinal mushrooms are not edible like the ground mushrooms that we find on the forest floor, the ones that we saute or throw in our salads. Medicinal mushrooms have these incredible properties and compounds, but they're indigestible if you were to eat them raw. And these mushrooms, because these mushrooms contain so much cellulose and chitin, and it protects itself, from being eaten in the first place in nature. It's almost like its immune system in sorts. So these mushrooms, you need to find some sort of way to extract them in order to unlock their properties. And the Chinese knew about this thousands of years ago, and different ancient medical systems and philosophies and ways of thought knew that in order to access the medicine that Rishi had, or that Chaga had, they needed to go through some sort of vigorous boiling or extraction process through hot water. And the reason why we use hot water to access the properties of these mushrooms is that the hot water breaks down the chitin and cellulose, and the hot water will pull out the polysaccharide sugars. Now, medicinal mushrooms are really rich in what's called polysaccharide sugar beta glucans. And these are very different from your simple sugars. These are long chain sugars, exotic sugars that really function on the level of our immune system. And they target our immune system, and they help our immune system modulate itself much more better. In other words, it helps our immune systems become more intelligent and adaptable, because we're constantly bombarded with things in our environment. Even when our minds are not even thinking about it, the body is in a constant battlefield. Say if you live in the city, there's all sorts of things, not only in our diet, but in our external environment, that's inducing some sort of immune response. And we're seeing really high cases of autoimmune diseases and all sorts of immune disorders. And these mushrooms are going to help make our immune system more resilient. It's going to improve the overall immune response to our overall environment. And so yeah, that's basically a good intro on when you're discovering medicinal mushrooms, you realize how amazing they are for the immune system.
So in addition to the immune system, one type of mushroom that I don't know if you would consider it medicinal, but I think that was the first time that I'd heard of mushrooms being used for something other, like you said, than eating or psychedelics, was, I think it's cordyceps, correct? Is the name of it. And this was in a product that was used as a pre-workout, right? Because it was said to induce, to elevate endurance, basically, which it was basically the same idea as taking, your typical pre-workout drink, but this was a mushroom-based elixir that, and I've tried it and honestly had really great results. I'd say that it's not great for all workouts. What I noticed is that it's a very chill kind of energy boost that's not like going to amp you up like caffeine would. It's much more, oh, how come I'm not tired at this point? I should be, but I'm not, right? After having performed the usual amount of, whether it's reps or whatever it was that I was doing in my workout. So maybe we could start with that, because that's something that I've experienced myself. So could you talk a little bit about cordyceps and what the idea, or what the basic principles are behind that mushroom?
Mushrooms are so fascinating because, on a general scope, medicinal mushrooms are immune system tonics. But when you get specific into all these different mushrooms, maitake, shiitake, turkey tail, cordyceps, reishi, chaga, lion's mane, you realize that each of them are unique in their own way, and each of them bring about their own unique properties. So cordyceps, for example, is an amazing, I would even say, pre-workout, post-workout, and an overall general great tonic to take for endurance and stamina and more adaptability in your life. Now, I'm no scientist, but I've certainly dove into the Chinese medicine and tonic herbal perspective of these substances, and cordyceps is definitely one of the higher ranking ones. And cordyceps is renowned to be a respiratory tonic, improving our ability to metabolize oxygen. It contains precursors to help us produce more testosterone. Um, it's a great kidney tonic, and the Chinese perspective of the kidneys is that this is like the kidneys hold the life force and the vital essence that constitutes our entire being. And cordyceps is something that you can take tonically every day, and it's going to nourish that, and therefore it's going to help us regenerate and adapt and have more physical power to do our exercises, to, you know, break boundaries, to push to that next level. And you'll find that, and I might butcher the story a bit, but cordyceps has a reputation in China in the Olympics, where some gold medalists were working with cordyceps, and they're, them getting a gold medal is attributed to the fact that they were working with cordyceps, which is really fascinating. And also, traditionally, when you look at cordyceps and where it comes from, it's very different from the cordyceps we're getting today, because you got cultivated cordyceps, which is grown in a kind of laboratory controlled environment. And then you've got the wild cordyceps, which traditionally grows off the heads of caterpillars in the high Himalayan mountains. And you've got the people of the Himalayas or Nepal who are digging through high elevations to find these little tiny little cordyceps mushrooms growing off the tip of the heads of caterpillars. And that stuff is super precious, and it's very rare to get, and it's very expensive. On the black market, it's worth half of that of gold, and a lot of the people there make their living off of that. And that stuff is really powerful. That stuff is rare to get, and it's expensive. But a lot of the folklore is based on that version of cordyceps.
So first of all, shout out to nature for growing powerful mushrooms on the heads of caterpillars. Um, yeah, I had no idea about that part. And yeah, and I think that's like what you're saying about, you know, the modern version of these things being grown in laboratories. And I think if anything is being mass produced at some point, obviously that's going to happen, right? But that's not to say, I'm guessing that the lab version of these mushrooms probably is still potent and probably still provides, you know, many of the benefits that you were discussing. May not
Absolutely.
be the same potency and, you know, as caterpillar head mushrooms. But again, you know, I think if we want to produce these things in a way that many people can benefit from it, we have to find alternatives to the original methods, right?
Definitely. And
So, yeah.
something said in the fact that these substances are found in high elevations, and then they help us utilize oxygen on much better. It's really strange when you get into herbalism and you look in all this stuff and you study the properties of these herbs and you study where they're actually growing in nature, and you make the similarity. There's a connection between the fact that, for example, and this is with many herbs, that cordyceps is going to help you adapt to low oxygen environments, and it comes from high elevations,
Yeah.
right?
So low oxygen is where it thrived. And
Yeah,
so it's going to help you do the same thing. I think that's awesome. So you mentioned Rishi before.
yeah.
So maybe that's the next one we could dive into. So what are the benefits of Rishi? Maybe a little bit of the history behind it, and yeah, and how can people use it in their everyday lives to improve their lives?
Reishi, nicknamed the 10,000-year-old mushroom, the herb of spiritual potency, the mushroom of immortality. It's one of my favorite herbs. If I had to take one herb for the rest of my life, it would be reishi. It would be wild reishi, to be specific, because it brings about its own unique properties when it's found in nature rather than what's cultivated in a controlled environment, which is still fantastic. And reishi is really special. It's an adaptogen for the nervous system, I would say, in terms of helping us improve our stress response to our environment, developing a resiliency to stress. And there's all sorts of stressors that we're dealing with on a regular basis. I would say it's also a heart tonic. Um, you know, Coincide with its ability to calm the nervous system, to reduce the cortisol in the body, and to kind of like bring you into your heart space. And the tonic herbal system calls reishi a Shen tonic, and Shen translates as spirit in Chinese, and the spirit resides in the heart. And reishi is a Shen tonic, and so a lot of the times, let's say you go into nature, you find a wild reishi mushroom, you dry it, you cook it in a pot of tea, you boil it for 45 minutes, you drink it. And I recently told somebody that drinking reishi is like, it's like meditation in a cup, because you drink it and it brings you to this instant state of calmness. You're in the present, and it's just like you did 30 minutes of meditation where your brainwave states are totally different, because people don't realize how much stress hormone that's going on in the brain. And when you just shut that off, it's just like, boom, you're kind of like in your heart space. There's kind of like a heart and brain coherence. And I find reishi has the ability to bring that up. Reishi also is a fantastic immune system tonic, and it's great for detoxifying the liver in a very gentle way. It's a great kidney tonic. It's great for sleep. It's great for reducing anxiety. And finding the wild stuff is one thing, but if you're going to start with reishi, you want to kind of get like the whole mushroom or find it in slices. And there's a lot of places you can find that, or even in extract powders and capsules. And the best way to receive the benefits of these substances is to have them in a hot water kind of like setting. Tea, you pop open the capsules, mix it with hot water, you boil it for 45 minutes, you drink it hot, and you're really going to feel the power that reishi can bring for you.
It sounds to me like mushrooms have this kind of, they do this, they do that. They're not this one single focus, right? Like this one thing can provide so much. And I think there must be, before we go into any of the other mushrooms, something I want to touch on is I'm sure that you've been faced with skepticism as far as, does this stuff really work? There's not that much real science behind it. And, and I think about those things too, right? When it comes to nutrition, I feel like, especially in the medical system, nutrition is the last thing people look at, right? First, we're going to start with, pharmaceutical drugs. And if those don't work, then we're going to talk about other pharmaceutical drugs. And if that doesn't work, okay, now maybe we'll dive into, oh, what are you eating? What are you not eating? What are some of the nutrients that you're not getting? What are some, different types of supplements that you might be taking? And so for me, especially when I think about mushrooms, having, experienced the psychedelic version, and I think many people have, there is no doubt about the potency of these psychedelic mushrooms. And if anyone doubts that, please try, and you will know for sure that this is a thing, right?
Yeah.
And because we're talking about the same basic, species of organism, that to me right there kind of, hey, let's not be skeptics about this, right? If that type of mushroom can be that potent, why not these medicinal mushrooms? Right? I think that's, for me, one of the first things, because often when you take, and I remember you have your products, and I've tried your products and they're fantastic. But if I did not have an educated mind when it comes to these things, and I pick up this package, this elixir, and I look at the ingredients, there's a lot of stuff that I've never heard of. So I might be a little bit skeptic about, does this work? Does this not work? What's the point of taking these things? So when you build these elixirs, what are ways that you're maybe boosting the effects of the mushrooms or including other ingredients that will, kind of accompany the mushroom ingredients to create just a better product. Maybe we could touch on that a little bit, and then we'll dive into some of the other mushrooms that you're a fan of.
Well, anytime people are working with mushrooms and they're wanting to specifically focus on the immune system, it's said that to combine with the natural botanical ingredient that's rich in vitamin C with the medicinal mushrooms, because the vitamin C lowers the molecular weight of the polysaccharides, so it absorbs even more. So that says that combining vitamin C, like from camu berry or elderberry or an acerola cherry type of thing, with the mushrooms while you're consuming them is like a potentiator. You're like stacking the odds in your favor. It's like you're taking mushrooms, you put the vitamin C with it, now it's times 3. Take that with more minerals like from shilajit or a really good mineral supplement altogether, and that's potentiating it even more. And so the minerals and the vitamin C with the medicinal mushrooms are a really good combo to look at when you're focusing on the health of your immune system and getting it into tip-top shape.
Yeah, and I think that's that's a basic principle for most nutrition, in the sense that, what we've done in modern times, if we've isolated these compounds, right? You can go to any pharmacy and you'll have every single vitamin classified one next to the other. Every mineral has been extracted. And so, but as most people know, that can't really replace ingesting these same compounds in the natural form. Why? Because, at least the way I understand it, is nature did not design these things to be taken in isolation,
Exactly.
right? And often, like you said, I like the word potentiation, where one mineral on its own may have a certain effect, but when you combine it with other elements, it's going to potentially be more powerful or just potentially have a completely different effect, which is probably the effect that was naturally intended in the beginning. Whether, we can argue about the intention part, but yeah. But I think what you're saying makes so much sense to me, right? That the one thing on its own it's the same as the sum of its parts, right? That whole way of saying, like, what is it? The whole is always more than the sum of its parts, right? Like, each one on its own is never going to be as great as when you bring all these things together.
100%.
Yeah, that's great. And so what is another mushroom? So another one you mentioned was lion's mane. That's something that I've also heard buzzing around quite a bit in the nutrition world. So maybe we could touch on that one.
Lion's mane is definitely gaining a lot of attention in the biohacking and nootropic community as a brain tonic, as a memory and concentration tonic, because lion's mane is being studied to induce neurogenesis in the brain, and that's the growth of new neurons, which is really incredible that a mushroom can help us do that, to help the brain work better at doing its job. And so I think that's why lion's mane is so fascinating today, with the uprise in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and all sorts of just like compromises with our cognitive abilities. Lion's mane is a really good, gentle ally to be taking nowadays for just supporting the health of our brain. And once again, if you're just going to take lion's mane alone, that's great, but you're also wanting to look at all the other things that are going to support your cognitive health, such as, incorporating saturated healthy fats and just minimizing anything that's going to, take away from your cognition, or, eating a lot of oxidized oils will really damage that. So lion's mane is really something special for that.
And so it sounds to me like you have the cordyceps, which seems to be much more of a physical,
Yeah.
right? It's going to be more of a physical strengthener, I guess, of the system, right? It's going to boost your physical self. And then you have lion's mane, which seems to be much more of your mental self, right? It's more of a mind booster. Then you have reishi, which is more of an immune booster, right? Is that pretty safe to say?
Yeah, safe to say that cordyceps is definitely on the physical. Lion's mane is like the mental. Reishi would be probably more on the spiritual, immune system, nervous system.
Yeah. So it sounds to me like if you can get a nice mix of these things, you're kind of checking all of those boxes, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't know if you have an idea about this, but how can we combine So something that I've been really interested in lately is really combining the ancient with the modern, right? Combining, let's say, spiritual practices with modern medicine, combining ancient nutritional practices with modern products. And I think what happens is that it's almost been divided into two camps, right? Like I believe in the ancient or I believe in the modern. But I think that there's a bridge to be built there. I think that it's important that we be able to combine these two things because a big tendency is often that only the modern is worth paying attention to, and anything that's too old, yeah, that's that old ancient crap. It never really worked, which I think is completely false. But I also think that you have to be careful that modern medicine has brought a lot to the
Yeah.
world in the sense that you just look at life expectancy and all those things that we can't deny the power of modern medicine. But what are ways that we can integrate the two? What are ways based on your experience, how can we integrate what I would consider ancient nutrition with more modern nutrition?
It's a big subject, I think, because there's a lot of psychological deprogramming to do around that. And when we take a few steps back and we get into the subject of ancestral nutrition, and we put ourselves in the footsteps of our ancestors in a world where there was a quarter of the diseases that we're seeing today, like, why is that? And we're living, when we do a little bit of comparison, our food system is a commerce-based food system. And the way our medical system works has stripped out, it's like everything has been extracted, isolated, concentrated, um, built around convenience, around commerce, around gratification, and we've breeded out of foods for example, like in agriculture and just the evolution of agriculture and where a lot of our foods have come from. A lot, if you go in the grocery store and you start asking the question, like, where did all these foods come from? Well, a few hundred years ago, a lot of the fruits and vegetables we see did not exist once upon a time. And a lot of these fruits and vegetables are coming from plants, or they were very different looking and they were much more concentrated in minerals and nutrients and all sorts of things. So for me, I often think, and I put myself in the footsteps of the ancestors, and I think back and I'm like, what would my diet look like then? Well, there's no prepackaged garbage, there's no processed food, there's no oxidized oils, very low carb, especially if you're living in the northern hemisphere. You're thriving on a lot of animal fat because animals today are breeded to have much more leaner protein mass than fat. And then you're kind of thriving, you're connected to nature, and you're working with different herbs and mushrooms and different things like that. And every tribe had some sort of shaman or medicine man that would pass down knowledge to one generation to the next. And I think it's a psychological reprogramming that we need to do, and it's that to create that bridge from the old to the modern, is that we need to really seriously evaluate all of these variables. There's a lot of variables to evaluate, and like, I really believe that we're living through a medical deficiency nowadays, and I would like to redefine what that word medical means, because I'm really talking about natural medicine, herbalism, medicinal mushrooms that I believe were once really prominent and abundant in our diets, and they were giving our bodies a lot of variety, a lot of phytochemistry, a lot of different nutrients that nowadays, because of our commerce-based food system, has stripped out, has breeded out the nature, the sauvage in the food that we're getting today. And so it's really hard to put thumb on a nail, but like I think you and the audience are following me here.
Yeah, what's really what you're triggering right now as you're talking, I'm listening to you talk and I'm thinking what we've done, where we're at now, it feels like is, like you said, we have a broken food system, right? That's feeding us in a way that does not sustain us. That's feeding us in a way that's hurting us. But it sounds to me like by drinking your herbal elixirs every day and being careful about what you eat, you reduce the need for the modern system, right?
The dependency on that, and
Yeah.
eventually we find ourselves becoming more autonomous, more independent, and ultimately more sovereign in ourselves and in and regaining that trust with Mother Nature. And a lot of us have lost that. We're disconnected from our mother and Mother Nature. And I think that's really kind of like the shift, the paradigm shift that needs to happen.
Yeah, I completely agree. I completely agree. I think, like you said, it's going back to nature, right? And going back to what nature provides and not depending so much on the modern versions or the modern evolution of some of these things, right?
Yeah.
Because every modern thing at some point was based in nature, right? Every drug we take, every medicine that exists at some point came from a natural form. Yeah. So Derik, man, thank you. I think that already, unless is there another mushroom that you absolutely want to touch on that maybe we haven't spoken about or?
I mean, I think the most popular mushroom that we forgot to mention is chaga.
Okay,
Uh,
yeah, let's go into that, please.
that's another big one that I think is a great entry level mushroom for people who don't know where to start. And I've realized how many people, even like, sometimes it's really funny because I'll go into Mont Tremblant here in the Laurentians, Quebec, and I'll walk out of the forest into the touristic village with bags full of reishi and chaga, and I'll have like baby boomer generation, older people being like, hey, is that chaga? I've been working with chaga. Hey, there's plenty of chaga on my land. What should I do? And everyone's talking about chaga, and they think every mushroom that's medicinal is chaga. And so chaga has gained a lot of popularity. And that's one that was very popular in China. It's very popular in Siberian shamanism and was used and consumed by the First Nations people. And chaga, I think, really embodies that like healing, immune system, regenerative aspect. There's a lot of research being done on chaga for its ability to halt the proliferation of cancer and tumor cells. Not saying that it cures cancer tumor, but there's a lot of scientific research being done on it. And chaga is just such a gentle, yet another adaptogenic mushroom that also requires boiling in water. And it's just like one of those things that it does all, like not does all, but it's just like an overall wellness substance that you can take every day. And it's just going to continue having that preventative, nourishing, tonic impact on your health.
Amazing. So you mentioned briefly that I know that you have some products, but I think right now you're in a bit of a state of transition and maybe your products aren't quite available, right? Are we right there?
Yeah, we're right there.
Okay. All good, all good. But maybe if you can, after the episode, if you can maybe send me some links that you know of where people can get some of these products, whether they're your products or products that you recommend.
Totally.
Because I think we presented some really valid, some very inspirational information here. And I think that there's a lot of people out there looking for that way to transition into a more holistic, more natural lifestyle. And it sounds to me like these medicinal mushrooms are a great place to start. So is there any way that people can connect with you if they'd like to get more information? I know that you do some one-on-one coaching and that you're available for people who need that knowledge.
I'm a big Instagrammer, so you can definitely follow me on Instagram. And I wonder if we can like drop some links there. So you can follow me on Instagram or shoot me an email. I answer all my questions. And I think one more thing that's worth mentioning is that a lot of the time people think like, yeah, medicinal mushrooms are great, right? And people are like, I want to find some chaga in the forest, but never find it. I want to find some reishi in the forest, but never find it. And there's something really beautiful and medicinal in of itself. The act of going out in nature and foraging and not finding anything ended up being more healing and nourishing than actually getting the mushroom itself. And once again, I think this encourages people to actually just go out in nature and, let nature work on you. And even if you don't find anything, like nature is medicine in of itself.
All right. I think that's a perfect place to stop. First of all, my nature behind me is freaking out. I always forget to close the door before I record these sessions, and my dogs are just having a good time, following the ways of nature. But yes, but absolutely. I think everything, if there's one lesson here, is like the mushrooms come from nature. Nature can heal you. Give nature a chance, right? And Derik, man, thank you so much for taking the time. I'll make sure that, there's plenty of links in the description of these videos to make sure that people can connect with you, find the information that they need, and hopefully, take a chance on some medicinal mushrooms and see how it can help them in their lives.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, man.